2017. Your roll call, please.
Board Member Liu,
Present.
Board Member Kim,
Here.
Board Member Balte,
Present.
Board Member Firth,
Here.
Board Member Guyer.
Great. So now it's time for oral communications for items that are not on the agenda. I don't see any public speakers here. And I don't think we have any agenda changes today. So we can go directly into the first item, which is item number 2, public hearing for a quasi-judicial item, 3045 Park Boulevard, consideration of a major architectural review to allow demolition of an existing office building and construction of a new 2-story, 29,120 square foot R&D building. The environmental assessment is an initial studies being prepared in accordance with CEQA, and the zone district is GM with the AD overlay. And our project planner is Graham Owen. Welcome.
I'm going to say something. So, Chair, just as a reminder, it's a quasi-judicial item. So, if the board members have any disclosures, this would be the time to state those.
I don't see any disclosures.
All right, thank you, Chairman Liu. Graham Owen, I've been working with the applicant team here on the project that's here before you today, 3045 Park Boulevard. This is an application for architectural review for a new 29,120 square foot office, R&D building. This project was previously reviewed by the board in an earlier iteration, November 19th, 2015, and December 17th, 2015. At that time, the project was also tied with 2747 Park Boulevard, which was split off from this application at a later date, and then has gone through the architectural review process and is currently under construction. This iteration of the project was previously reviewed by the board on July 20th, 2017. At that hearing, the board had a number of comments regarding the site plan and the elevations, and the application has returned to the board for consideration, and the applicant has responded to a number of the comments that were raised. Just as a reminder, this application is subject to the interim annual limit ordinance, which caps the total net new square office construction in the city, in specific areas of the city, at 50,000 square feet. So this project would be 19,000 square feet, because there is existing office space on the site currently, and so as a result, it would be a large component of the total net new square footage that's allowed under the current cap for this year. So this is the revised site plan. As you can see, the general location of the building is more or less the same as it was with the earlier iteration of the plans that was reviewed on July 20th. The largest change in terms of the site plan has to do with the parking structure. At the time that the application was reviewed on the 20th, the first level of the parking structure was approximately, I think, 3 feet below grade. In response to the board's comments, as well as the staff report that was prepared, the applicant has sunk the first level of the parking structure down approximately 5 feet below grade. The structure had also previously had about a 3-foot setback off of the street. That's been pushed back considerably to allow for basically a transition in terms of the setback from the building at 195 Page Mill to the building, to the main structure of the building that's on the subject site, allowing for a transition in setback. Other changes to the to the site plan involve the ramp that leads up to the second level of the parking structure. That's been shifted forward towards the street about 7 feet, and then there's been some modifications to the site surface parking, as well as the loading space. Those are the major changes in terms of site design. Additionally, there's been some changes to the courtyard entrance right at the apex of Park Boulevard and Olive Avenue. Some refinements to the landscaping. Previously, there was a rounded seating area that's been modified to a more kind of park-like or urban plaza sort of feel with trees, as well as park benches. I'll let the applicant kind of describe the changes to the facades, but there has been some considerable changes in terms of the materials and the colors for this structure. I think the comment that the board had raised previously was that the building, as previously designed, had a kind of a muted color scheme, tans, grays, and that the building needed a little bit more punch. And so as a response, the applicant has kind of brightened the images using different materials, mullion patterns, et cetera, to give it a little bit more of a contemporary feel. These are the two facades facing Park Boulevard, as well as the facade facing 195 Page Mill, also known as the Hobach Building. The image on the top is the facade facing the Caltrain right-of-way, and the image beneath that is the facade facing the Groupon Building. One of the biggest changes to the facades on the building is what has been done with the treatment of the facade frontage along Park Boulevard for the parking structure. Previously, there was a metal louvered screen that was proposed on the front facade of the parking structure. This has been modified to show a different kind of screen. I call it the bird's nest design, kind of reminiscent of the Coliseum at the Beijing Olympics, for example. Also, some new trellises have been added to the upper level of the garage structure to allow for less light to spill over, as well as to enhance the appearance of the upper deck. This is the facade on the top facing the Caltrain right-of-way. As you can see, that's been modified to allow for a living wall, or a green screen, if you will. Additionally, there's been a modification to the lower level of the deck that is more apparent in this section view on the bottom, which shows that the lower level can be accessed via a pedestrian path, which leads from the lower level of the deck up to Park Boulevard. So key considerations at this point, staff still remains, we believe that there has been some modifications that the applicant has made to address residential compatibility concerns that were raised at the previous hearing. Trellis structures, for example, living walls structures, et cetera. Also dropping the structure a little bit below grade also helps in terms of preventing direct views from the adjacent residential units into, from vehicles that are using the structure into those residential units in terms of glare and those sorts of things. There is still the open question of what's the best location for this structure. I think we believe that either doing an underground structure or something relegated to the rear along the Caltrain right-of-way would be ideal, given that this is kind of a clean slate, so to speak. The existing structure is coming down. We have a new acre plus to work with. So we think that in terms of how the site could be developed, that those would be ideal considerations from a site planning standpoint. The additional concern that we have is regarding the vehicle circulation. There are a couple. This is in your plans, so you can look at this if you'd like. There are a number of circulation diagrams which demonstrate how vehicles and trucks should circulate on the site, or would circulate on the site. As you can see, there are a number of dead-end aisles both in the structure and on the surface parking lot. In terms of the circulation diagrams, given these diagrams, it's still relatively unclear to us how easily the site would be managed from a vehicle standpoint. There's not a lot of room to turn around, for example, so I think that there is some work that could be done to make the site planning more intuitive and to eliminate some of those dead-end aisles. So at this point, we're recommending continuation of the project so that the board can provide comments. We believe that the circulation needs further refinement, but also we're still working on the initial study for the project. So there's going to be additional inputs from our environmental consultant and our traffic consultant in the coming weeks. Additionally, as we mentioned, this is subject to the annual office limit. So staff couldn't make a final decision on the project, or the director can't make a final decision on the project until March 31st of 2018. So with that, I'll leave it at that for now and let the applicant provide their presentation. Also wanted to introduce my colleague, Jarrett Mullen, who is our transportation planner, who's also been working on the project as well. So if you have any specific concerns related to circulation or transportation, he's here as a good resource.
Okay, and so for the applicant presentation, you'll have 10 minutes.
Good morning. Tom Gilman with DES Architects. Let's see. Oops. Oh. Go here instead. Okay. Oh, yeah, okay. Okay, so as you may recall, this is the property that's at the terminus of Olive and Park, just south of Page Mill Road. Here's a kind of a blow-up and some of the context images of the adjacent buildings, the Groupon and the 195 Page Mill. So as staff has said, from the comments we heard last time, we went back, took another look, and I'll get into the architecture a little later, but in general, there was comments about, well, maybe things could be a little simpler, a little clearer. Maybe the overall design of the building could be a bit more bold. There were some comments that we had a number of, in fact, I think we had 4 materials on the building, many of which were somewhat similar in coloration and so on. So as we get into the architecture, I'll show that. But one of the things we also took a look at was trying to simplify some of the front facade of the building itself to create a little stronger pedestrian plaza at the end of where Olive terminates at Park Boulevard. And so one of the things that we took a keyed off of was that the train at the back of the property is at an angle to the Park Boulevard. And so we've kind of picked up on that, and so as we'll get a little closer to the building, we've actually sliced the front of the building. The main facade of the building has a slice that's actually parallel to the rear of the property. So some reference to the fact that there is this other transportation element that occurs, and that shows up again in some of the other more details of both the garage facade and the building facade. We've actually worked with staff, both planning and transportation, and looking at some of the refinements overall of the site. So we're a little bit surprised about the continued comments about the dead ends, and I can show a bit more detail, but we've really worked hard to provide turnarounds at each of the locations on the property. Again, this is a site that has about 30,000 square feet. It has about 116 cars. It's not a massive amount of parking overall. Our own experience for buildings of this size is that typically a company will have assigned parking, and so the wayfinding, if you will, in a vehicle is relatively simple because typically people know where they're going to be parking. In terms of where we have visitor parking, there's a number of places where we can provide that could be easily seen or accessed as you come onto the site. But again, typically we handle that as a tenant, tenant desires. Tenant maybe they want 3 parking spaces for visitors, maybe they want a half a dozen. Typically that's something that we typically work out with the tenants themselves. There were, maybe just go up, see. And so then looking at some of those circulation kind of elements, this is a diagram that shows in color the turnaround areas. So we've broken the parking down into smaller areas. As you come onto the site, you can immediately go up the ramp to the upper level of the parking deck, or you can continue back and then go down the ramp to the lower level. As you can see on the upper level, we have one area where it's a little bit longer, and so we have on the site plan itself, on the left side, we're showing the lower level of the deck. And so you enter at the back, and then you can access all the way down that lower level of the parking deck, and the red area is the turnaround. If for instance, someone was parked in your space or whatever. If you do go up the ramp, the drawing at the upper right then shows the upper level of the deck, and the two red areas then are the turnarounds at each end of that parking. And then if you go around to the back of the building at the surface parking lot, the red area at the lower portion of the drawing then is the turnaround for that portion of the parking lot. Let's see, you've got. These were some diagrams from our civil engineer showing the turning radiuses. On the left side, showing the turning radiuses. Upper left is the access for vehicles into the lower level of the parking deck, and then lower left are the diagrams for the circulation and turning radiuses for vehicles into the upper level of the deck. The right side, site plan view, then are the turning diagrams for both trucks that would come to the loading zone, that then would continue to the rear of the site and do a three-point turn to leave the site, as well as emergency vehicles that would come in and then leave. When we last met, there were comments about, boy, it'd be great if the parking structure had a little bit less impact, and it felt like that maybe it was crowding the street and so on. And so, as was indicated, we had about 3 feet of landscape or setback of the building. We've now pushed the parking structure back so that we have, from the rear of sidewalk to the face of the parking structure, 11 feet of landscape. In addition, as staff has pointed out, we've also pushed the parking structure, submerged it so it's really half down, half up. The upper level parking deck is plus 6.5 feet, including then the guardrail. The top of the guardrail is 10 feet. I can't dunk a basketball, but I could almost jump and touch the top of that railing. So we've really tried to pull it down so it has a much more pedestrian kind of scale, as well as pushing it back. So we've got a significant more amount of landscaping along the facade as well. In this plan view, we're seeing the upper level of the structure, and those 5 rectangular areas that we're showing landscaping are canopy elements that extend out over the parking. They extend out, they cantilever out 14 feet, they're 34 feet long in each case. And so we have landscaping that, with planting boxes that occur basically at the deck level. Planting comes up that and extends out over, so that, and the top of those are essentially at the level of the floor line of the residential adjacent. And here we can see that. You can see the residential is the second level up on the left, and directly across at that same level is the top of these landscaped trellis kind of elements. So we've alternated those are 5. So as you look out on from the residential areas, either the second floor or the third floor, there's a great deal of landscaped or green space that you're seeing, not simply a parking deck itself. Those things are about 8 feet. They do have lighting under them, so we're trying to also help shade some of the lighting that would occur for the upper level of the parking deck. In addition, along the property line on the left side here, we have a 10-foot setback. We have a line both of major shrubs, evergreen shrubs, as well as a line of trees in that area to help provide additional landscaping. On the section with that cantilevered area, you can also see that there will also be a green screen kind of character, so that there's additional planting as you look, say, down into that from either the second floor residential or from the first floor R&D looking out that way as well. Here's the views from the street. We've removed the trees here in order to be able to see the building, and then the view from the building, the new office or R&D building looking north. And then the views from, as staff had shown, from residential and from the train up above there. So this is a large plan view of that new plaza, and again you can see everything has been canted so that it's on the on this angled parallel to the facade itself. The 8 or 9 accent trees, these are Muskogee Creek crepe myrtles. The idea of having some different kind of accent trees. We've worked a little bit with the urban forester folks. We've gotten quite a bit of drought-tolerant and native materials everywhere on the site, and in talking with them, they felt like that in this one area, having a different kind of more decorative tree was probably fine overall. So this plaza now tries to address the fact that it really becomes more kind of a public-private kind of area that easily for anyone to use. It's the accent element that is at the terminus of Olive, and also by pulling out, previously we had a series of sort of berms and built-in sort of a sequestered kind of area, which kind of prevented folks coming from the parking deck over into the lobby itself. So this really opens up things much more considerably and allows easy movement and access. And here's the facade that now we've looked at. As I said, previously we had 4 various materials overall. We've simplified that to the entire building is now metal panel. You can see now that angled surface and sort of simplified the massing that we had previously in the building. This is the southwest face, and then to the right around the corner would be the southeast. Both of these facades have considerable sunshades, preventing, so keeping the building cool from a passive point of view. The elevation at the top then is from Park. The elevation below would be from the parking deck looking over. This would be the elevation top, that was the elevation from the train, and then from the Groupon building at the bottom. This is the facade then looking at the parking deck itself. We're using this, was referred to as the bird nest material. This is a Bach Modern, is the manufacturer of this material, and used as a decorative kind of element on the facade of the building. And then the view looking down toward the project with the building straight ahead, and then to the left is the parking deck itself. And I think I might have, so here's a view with the trees also. It pulled those off on the last view. So here's with those additional trees ghosted in along the facade of the garage. And again, the trees ghosted in along the facade of the building itself. So be happy to answer any questions.
Great, thank you, Tom. I should open up the hearing for any members of the public. I don't have any cards. Are there any board member questions? Peter?
Yes, good morning. I have 2 questions, one for staff and one for the applicant. Architect Gilman, just enlighten me. If I'm coming into work and my spot is on the top of the parking garage, and I go up to that spot and for some reason it's taken, what do I do? Can you just drive my path through? How do I then take care of things? If you go to your site plan, maybe.
Oops. Graham, I'm not sure.
So again, I'm driving in, I go to the top floor of the garage and I'm
Yes.
not able to park. Then what do I do?
Oh yeah, I just want to go back to the site plan. I'm going to move back to, or try to go back to the site plan here. Oh, here we go. Okay, so if you you arrive on the site, you come up the ramp, turn left or right, depending upon where your particular space was. You get to the end of the aisle. It turns out your space has been taken. You go to the end of the aisle. You turn in, do a 3-point turn with the turnout space. Turn around, come back, either look for another space perhaps, or come back down the ramp. And so it's really an issue of...
So the question is, when I come down the ramp, then what?
Pardon?
When I come down the ramp,
Yeah.
am I able to make a sharp left-hand turn to get back into other parking in the site? That's the question for you.
Yeah, I think you can, yeah. That's where the road widens out to access the, the green area there is actually the truck, the truck loading area.
I see. So it's big enough then that if I come down the ramp, I can make a sharp left-hand turn?
Yeah, and again, the idea of this size of building, typically we often see that this is, basically handled as assigned to parking. I mean, those things may happen. I mean, it happens at our building occasionally as well.
Thank you. And then for staff, if you could clarify for me, this is under the Retail Preservation Ordinance. And so what happens come April and say this building is approved for 19,000 more square feet of office space, but several other projects are also approved. And so the city has to decide which projects go forward. How does that determination made?
It's, so one point of clarification, it's not the retail preservation, but it's the annual office
I'm
cap.
sorry.
No, that's
You're
okay.
correct.
So yes, it's subject to that cap. There's about 10,000 square feet of qualifying square footage on the site currently. So the cap looks at net new. If there is, just so you know, right now, it doesn't appear as though we're going to be coming up in excess of that 50,000 square foot cap. But should it be exceeded, then the project would need to be deemed complete and be ready for the council's approval or denial. But there's essentially a section of our code that allows for the council with their discretion to determine which projects should move forward. And it's a contest, so to speak. So there's specific criteria that they can use to evaluate each of the qualifying projects, but that determination would need to be made between April and I believe the end of May. So there's a 2-month window during which qualifying projects can be approved or denied.
So essentially, the city council will decide which of these projects moves forward based on these published criteria, which have to do with the quality of the design, basically?
Correct. Yes, sir.
Thank you.
When there is an excess of the 50,000, under the 50,000, they're just approved.
I understand. Thank you.
Q. If I could have the architect also explain to me then, if I have some accessibility requirements and if I'm in a wheelchair, if I'm on crutches, how would I park and enter the building?
Yes. Maybe it's most easily shown here. On the left is the site plan itself, including showing the lower level of the parking deck. The accessible parking spaces are those shaded spaces, kind of at sort of midpoint. So you park, you get out of your car, you go, you move north or you go up page in this drawing, and
I'm sorry, so I have to go away from the building actually to get to the building?
the ramp itself is on the upper side of the parking deck here. So then you come up the ramp and then go along the street parking lot or parking sidewalk, and then come to the entrance to the building itself. So it's covered accessibility parking.
Okay, but in order to actually then get to the building, I have to go to what would be on the top of the page, that little walking portion, am I correct?
Yes, so there's a ramp there that comes up the 5 feet.
So
essentially.
the lower level of the parking you said was submerged about 5 feet?
Right.
So there's then a ramp that I have to go up there?
Yes.
Is there then a retaining wall on the other side of the ramp, or how does that ramp work in relationship with the neighboring site?
Correct. Yeah, so the retaining wall, and there's landscaping then beyond that.
Okay.
It's shown in a section, right? I think on sheet A13.
Yes, on this,
I see. Okay, and then one more question. The scale of the metal panels, the Bach Modern panels, is the scale that's on this materials board the same scale that will be actually used, or will it be a larger scale as shown in the drawings, or?
yeah, we're thinking of a larger scale than that, but that was just a model to show this is the concept of that material.
Okay,
Right,
thank you.
so something that's a little larger scale that makes sense in terms of the size that we're
Got it.
talking about.
Okay.
Wynn, do you have a question? Or no?
I do.
Okay.
Thank you. So I've been trying to understand the zoning in this area because it's complicated. And this is the GM zone. It's light industrial under our existing comp plan, and it doesn't, for example, allow a law office there. So how is this building designed differently than an office building? What makes it, I realize there's a range of uses that are permitted, but what are the features of it that make it a GM district building as opposed to a straight office building?
So the allowed uses in GM zone, the code is very specific in terms
It
of
is
allowing software
Right.
type R&D use. In this case, our floor to floors are 14 feet, so that we could have the possibility of 10-foot ceilings. However, typically with this type of R&D use, we typically would see typically open structure and so on. It's a more modernist kind of look. But essentially, the kind of use that would go inside, we would probably anticipate could be a variety of benching kind of layout, or it could be low cubes, but typically it seems rather open and so on. And we're simply providing a lot of natural daylight otherwise.
And are you saying that the height of the floors is big enough so that if they did want to have labs that required ducting and whatnot, that would be possible?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, and what about in terms of loading zones? How does the truck loading work?
Yeah, so we have a code-compliant size truck loading zone. Typically with these types of uses, we don't see a major, particularly for the scale and size of the company that would be here. We're looking at probably more of a startup scale company and so on. Don't typically see a lot of truck use other than, say, delivery, UPS, those, that type of nature. So.
Thank you. And then I had a question for staff. Oh, one more question. I can't remember. Are you proposing photovoltaics? And if not, is it designed so they could be added afterwards?
We are not currently. The building itself is designed so that 15% of the roof area can accept photovoltaics at any point.
15%?
15% of the roof surface, yes.
Thank you. And then for staff, one of the things that's making this confusing for me is the recent development pattern doesn't seem to be particularly uniform in terms of density and scale. So could you explain to me how these parcels are zoned and developed along Park here, or across the street if that's relevant?
The scale, for instance, the adjacent building at 195 Park Boulevard, it's sort of an anomaly. There's kind of a long history as to why that particular project moved forward in the manner that it did. But in short, the project does exceed the FAR, for example, and the density that's typically permitted in the general manufacturing district. There was a question of, at the time that it was submitted, we allowed residential uses, for example, in the general manufacturing district. While that application was in process, the council removed multifamily from the general manufacturing district as a permitted use. But that site in particular is a housing inventory site, so it was allowed to move forward with a residential component to it. In terms of the design of that building in particular, there was a number of design enhancement exceptions which were granted by the city council at the time. So that speaks to that particular parcel. The Groupon building is a little bit more to scale with the general manufacturing district. I believe it's 2 floors. I don't know the exact FAR, for example, but it's generally speaking pretty close in scale to the building.
195 Park has an FAR of what?
I believe it's about 1.4 to 1.
And so the council then removed the housing option.
Correct. Yeah,
But they left it on the site, so that's why on the housing inventory.
Yeah, correct. So
this was
in the comp plan, that was the site that was identified as a housing inventory site, so they allowed it to move forward.
But this one is not.
No, it's not.
Okay. And on the new draft comprehensive plan, which we are not bound by, and we don't even know if the council is going to approve it, it's hard for me to tell what the proposed land use is here. Because along this street, we have a lot of yellow and then this little strip of purple. Is the proposal that this remain GM or that it be multiple family?
I'm not sure. In terms of the comp plan designation, I don't believe that there's any plan to change it from light industrial with the current comprehensive plan, but I can certainly look at it.
Thank you. That would be helpful. Those are all my questions.
Thank you, Wynn. I have a quick question. For the landscape, what is happening with regard to fences along the Caltrain right-of-way and also along the Groupon property line?
So we have a green screen along the Caltrain side of the parking deck, and then along the parking lot, we have a we have a landscape strip that I believe is 5 feet. Yeah, 5-foot landscape strip, and then we have a series of fingers as well that extend into the parking lot, and so we have trees both in the fingers and as well as along the perimeter. And the same thing occurs really the entire length of the Groupon site. So we have trees and lands and shrubs along that area. As you probably know, we have to meet the shading criteria for the site overall, and so we've calculated that as well.
And then fencing?
Pardon?
Fencing. Are you proposing a fence in those areas?
I don't think. You know, I'm not sure that probably on Caltrain, we'd probably want to put a fence as well, but.
I don't know if they've been putting in new fencing?
I think there was probably a recent, they have that new design of their fence with a little.
And they've been adding barbed wire on
anti-climbing
top
kind
of that now. And so I was just curious, I guess maybe if staff could figure out what is,
Yeah,
what is required.
so we'll comply with whatever the requirement is, sure.
And then on the Groupon's side, are you thinking of maybe no fence?
I don't think a fence, right? Yeah, it hadn't been the intent, yeah. So it would just be our 5 feet of landscaping and their 5 feet that would essentially blend. So.
Great, good answer. And then on the garage, do you have any security concerns about having an open garage?
You know,
and then also, I'm thinking also too is, I mean, usually tech companies are fairly security sensitive as well. I mean, if you think about like A9 here in downtown.
Yeah, we're not concerned about having an open garage, and as you probably know, we build a lot of these kinds of buildings, and our garages are generally open, and our tenants don't have a problem with it. And so, in short, that's our answer. We've never closed off our garages in other sites, and we don't see a need to do so here. And it would be really driven by our tenants.
Okay, thank you. So it's unusual because we have so many other projects downtown where there are gates, you know, at the garages. Okay, so I think that's the only questions I have. Okay, board member comments. Who wants to start? Q.
Thank you. So this is kind of tough for me, but you know, I have a feeling that perhaps the overall site planning has been a little bit more set than maybe we would have liked to see. What I mean by that is that it just seems like there hasn't been enough done to the overall site planning and the circulation concerns that were brought up or were brought up today. To me, just the overall circulation of there being too many dead ends, you know, there's only one main entrance and exit for automobiles on the site, considering how large the site is and the fact that it's a complete empty slate, so to speak. It just seems like at least two entry and exit points would be the most efficient and provide the best access to the site. And I think, you know, I think it was proposed as such in a previous iteration of the project. Other than automobile circulation, the people circulation, you know, after having parked and walking to the building also concerns me. You know, especially for those ADA spots, I just don't see why you wouldn't have ADA spots closer to the building, or there being either an elevator or a ramp that, you know, really leads you to the building. I mean, I can just imagine, you know, somebody shows up, has to park in an ADA spot, and just to have to be directed by signs to get to that ramp rather than just to be able to see the building and walk towards it or roll towards it, doesn't seem like the best solution in this case. I mention all these site planning and circulation things because they bother me enough that I really can't get past those to to give you more comments on the parking structure itself and the building itself. But just overall, I think the reduction in different kinds of materials certainly is a little bit of a step forward. We noticed that it's a cooler color scheme and the materials are a little bit more sleek and perhaps read to be a little bit more of a startup and more contemporary. But at the same time, I'm not sure that it's something that really wows us. It's not a bad looking building by any sense, but it just doesn't seem like it's special enough considering the limitless possibilities that you have here on this site. There's some other concerns that I have with the parking garage. Again, the metal panel, it's great. It's better than not having any kind of a panel, but I just don't see how it necessarily ties into the overall design of the building and the site. The green screens and the plantings, the cantilevered screens, I think those are all great, but it's going to take time for those things to develop. And on the renderings and on the elevations, you have them very full, and we see a lot of that foliage. But in reality, how many years is it going to take for that to actually build up? I did want to compliment you, however, on the relationship. I have a feeling that perhaps maybe we stressed that relationship to the Hobach building more than, or maybe too much at the previous go-around. But I do think that relationship has improved quite a bit more, and I'm very appreciative of the fact that you are able to sink that a little bit further down so that people on the residential floors of the Hobach building aren't necessarily looking directly at the screen. And I think those cantilevered screens actually go a long ways in the future so that it goes even further to hide the parking spots. But I just wouldn't, I guess I'm a little bit frustrated to see that we keep coming back to this above grade structure and, again, it's 5 feet buried, but why can't we do an underground parking garage, or why can't we, it just seems like there has to be a way to get at least 2 entry and exit points onto this site, considering the amount of parking that you have. I'll leave it at that for now.
Thank you. Wen?
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation, both staff and applicant. On the point of the presentation, this is not the first time we've seen this, but we don't have an environmental document. Why? Could you explain the timing to me?
Sure, absolutely. We do have an initial study that's currently under review, and a traffic and circulation study that's also as a component of that initial study that we're conducting. As far as our schedule, we had anticipated that this would be returning, that we'd have an initial study around the holidays, and then we'd look at it, comment on it. We have an environmental consultant that's doing a lot of the work right now, but staff would review it, transportation and planning, public works, for example, and then we would also bring it to a hearing and have a third hearing on it, so that we would be able to provide the public with the opportunity to review the document.
So, as somebody who's supposed to be considering the environmental factors, it makes me very uneasy to be at our, whatever it is, hearing on this project, and with the applicant doing all this work to do this, and I still don't have even the environmental questionnaire to look at. I don't really care if these things are ready for public circulation. Of course, that would be preferable. But I do not like being in the position of not having read the environmental documents, and the applicant quite reasonably saying, in our code saying, but you're here for the umpteenth time, why are you bringing up these issues now? And the answer will be, because I didn't have the information, let alone the public comment on the information until now. And this is not a first-time concern. So I would appreciate it if staff would figure out how to at least get us more of this information sooner. I don't know, for example, is the toxic plume over here? What kind of constraints does that present? How bad is, what's the noise contour? There's no way you can read those things off the big maps. And what does the traffic and circulation study and analysis say? It's not enough to have elevations and site plans without that information in order to do our job, I think. more specifically, on the garage, I think it's much better in relationship to 195 Park. I think both the landscaping and the depression help. I do not think that the screen itself seems to have been, it looks to me too much like an add-on element and not something integrated with either the design of the streetscape or the design of the new building. So I'm not ready to say that that's a good idea or acceptable yet. I'm concerned about the response to the question about secure garage parking. And I say this partly as somebody who for years worked in a building where I had to call the security guards by firm policy to go to get my car in its open garage if I was leaving after 7, which I usually was. And almost every building that we're looking at these days has at least some access for secure parking. I think as a woman, I experience these spaces differently than some of you may. Silicon Valley, by all accounts, is notoriously hostile to women workers. And I think this is a design that's hostile. And I would like you to think about how you would make this, how this design would work so that when I leave at 11, and I'm 40 years younger than I am now, or even my current age, because unfortunately, this kind of violence is not limited to the young and the fit, how I would have a safe and comfortable passage there. It's particularly on my mind because we were just looking at another site nearby where the local merchants were very concerned about creating dark and not particularly publicly viewable spaces. So I don't think it works right now. I'm also skeptical about the internal circulation as it presently stands. On the landscaping, it may very well be that the more exotic trees are completely appropriate in the context of your overall landscaping and the quality of habitat that it provides, but it's too soon to tell. And if we are going to use exotic trees, and of course most of the trees in town are or were, I'd like some information about how it at least helps with our effort to have more bird and insect-friendly settings. I'm also concerned about the very limited potential for photovoltaics. One thing that tech companies are not is light on electricity consumption. At least historically they aren't. And it concerns me that the opportunity for this, again, bare-bones site to at least be electrically self-sufficient seems to have been missed, but I don't know what the numbers look like. I don't know if 15% of your roof would cover the proposed use or not. I would be interested in knowing. Thank you.
Great. And Robert.
Thank you. I have some of the same concerns that a couple of my fellow board members here, is that I like the basic design of the building. I like the use of the newer material, the revised materials. I do have a bit of a problem with, it seems like the only part of it that really hasn't been thought out are sort of the window walls or the glass mullions. They seem a little bit random, or don't really seem like they've been thought out as much as the overall concept of the building. The parking garage, I think, is a nice looking parking garage, but the interesting thing about it is I wouldn't have a problem with it if this was a situation where it was an existing building and you were putting in a parking garage, where it turned out that you needed more parking, so you put in a parking garage. The two structures don't seem to relate to each other. There's no way of automatically saying, oh, those two obviously go together, and I think that's probably, you know, if you're starting with a virgin site anyway, you would assume that would be the way to go. And then the big thing is, which I think all of us seem to be struggling with is just the whole fact of, I don't think the parking structure works. I mean, you come up the ramp, the first 2 or 3 parking spaces on each side, when you get to the top of the ramp, you have to do all kinds of meandering around to get into those spaces. Then if you get to the end, you have to do a T to try and get out of there again. It just doesn't seem to work. It seems either too small or too cramped. I agree also, if you come down the ramp, that's an awfully tight turn. I mean, I might be able to make it in my little 2-seater, but some of the other cars I see out there, some SUVs could have a hard time doing that. And with all the dead ends, you know, it's exactly that. I understand that putting a parking structure along the railroad tracks would leave you with sort of a strange bowling alley effect in the front of the building, and that I don't think that works. But something needs to be done that I think the flow would be better. I'm not married to the fact that you have to put it underground. I think you could come up with a successful parking structure that would work, but because going underground, it has its own set of problems to go with it, and the additional cost is understandable. So it's just one of these things that it's true that basically I like the design if you just look at it of the 2 units. I don't think they work together, and I think the flow is, I think, what everybody's having a problem with. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Peter?
Yes, thank you. I find myself in general agreement with my colleagues on the board. In particular, Q's comments about circulation seem to be sensible. I'll start, though, with just talking about the design of what I call 2 buildings, the parking structure and the main building. The main building, if I look at the 2 components of it, there's a glazed section and a section I call a solid section with a stronger form on it. On the glazing, I just can't seem to tell if you want it to feel vertical or feel horizontal. The mullions are sort of everywhere, back and forth, and it just needs a little more coherence. I also feel that perhaps it's a little bit too tall. When I look at your section, you have quite a bit of a parapet there, and I think if you cut it down, say, 4 feet or so, it would just look better. I don't think it'll affect the functionality inside. I'm not asking for that kind of thing, but the proportions aren't quite right on that. On the solid section, again, the proportions just don't feel right to me somehow. When you're doing that heavy solid wrap around a glazed panel, it's important to get the proportions of the solid piece right, and it's just not quite there for me. Secondly, maybe the material choice in that, which is a painted metal panel, is probably, I don't think it's the right thing. In that case, typically people use a stone of some kind. It tends to look more suitable for a solid material, and probably is more durable as well. The painted metal panels are probably over 20 years' time going to fade substantially and just not look as sharp as they would up front. I find the design of the parking structure to be problematic in that you're really counting on this trellis with plants growing on it as an important part of how the parking structure functions, and I just can't believe that those plants can thrive in that environment without a permanent gardener every day out there maintaining, watering, pruning. Those will die, and I can't imagine any landlord's going to spend what it takes to maintain them. Once they're gone, it's going to look terrible. You'll just have these arching 14-foot pieces of metal there, and that's not an effective solution. The same thing goes with the view of the building from the street. It's a beautiful rendering you have, but it really is dependent on getting perfect architectural execution and really good maintenance over time. And sorry, but I just don't see that happen on this kind of building. Usually it gets built, it gets rented, you collect money every month, and that's the end of it. And this particular design is so critically dependent on really great, loving maintenance, as though somebody lived there, and I just don't see that happening. Those 2 things said about the building. Well, thirdly, the parking structure and the main building, as Robert pointed out, just aren't incompatible. They're not architecturally the same in any way. And it seems to me that if they're going to be next to each other, part of the same development, they should. I'd like, though, to come back to where Q started with, was the overall site planning, because I also find myself very troubled by 3 fundamental aspects to it that I've said before in our previous meetings. But the first one is maybe best seen if you look at your image P14, which shows a view down Olive although I think deceptively, that I think you have a tremendous opportunity to make a strong planning move by really giving us a terminus, something we see as you come down Olive Avenue. What I'd like to ask you to do is, maybe on your next presentation, give us a view down Olive, which is closer to what I saw when I walked down Olive Street. And Olive focuses the view. It's lined with trees, and you come all the way from El Camino. The building really is a visual point there, or the plaza, or whatever you choose, but I think you need to have some terminus to that view, or some designed effort. And what I see now is sort of the corner of a building with some sort of a plaza and maybe a door, but the same problem I had back in July, that you really haven't designed a terminus. And I think it's got to do with your site planning, because the building is not quite in the right place. I'd suggest you shift the building over so you can actually design something on the building to terminate Olive Avenue, and then you'll get a room for a second parking exit on the other side. First comment. The second one is about the traffic circulation on the site, both vehicular and pedestrian, and I think my colleagues and the staff report do a fair job of explaining what the issues are, but I fully agree that it's just not working now, and it really needs to. I'll amend that by saying that you have a 1 acre blank site, and it's not nearly as difficult as many sites that people are struggling with in Palo Alto. And there's just no excuse that a firm with the talent that DES has can't come up with a functioning parking layout. You guys have done it over and over and over again. I've seen you, Architect Gilman, insist on it on other projects and other review boards. You know what we're talking about. It's just embarrassingly not adequate right now. And then lastly, the biggest issue I think is the parking structure. And I find, reviewing my notes, at the last review I suggested it should be put underground or at the back of the property. I find I have the same reaction today. I don't think you'll be able to fit the parking structure where you have it now and succeed at not having minimizing the impact on the adjacent residential building, which is what the code requires. And to me, there's two alternative ways of locating that parking structure that do minimize the impact. Minimize means do the least amount you can. If you were to put the parking at the back along the train tracks, if you put the parking under the building, I think you would take a step towards meeting that code requirement of minimizing the impact on the adjacent buildings, as well as solving many other circulation issues and site development issues and creating a terminus and getting rid of the issue of the two buildings that are incompatible with each other. And then I come to the applicants just to point out to you that in the event that this does become a beauty contest, is what people have called it, to City Council, the parking structure is going to sink your project. Think really hard how strongly you want to push for this. Almost every project we see now of this type has underground parking in the building. It just seems to make sense for the applicants. The City Council is more and more expecting that. So I just caution you how hard you want to push for this particular thing. I've seen now twice it comes back to us almost the same, putting different architectural details on it. But the core issue really is the parking structures in the wrong place. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. So, I think I'm on the same page as the rest of the board members. I don't feel quite as strongly that the garage has to be along the back or underground, but I think that the main problem I have with the garage is the accessible route, the ramp going along the north side of the property and then down along the sidewalk. And I don't think, it's not necessarily the board's purview, but I don't think you're going to get through the building department with that handicapped layout, crossing an aisle down the sidewalk, crossing a driveway to the building. I've seen it before on other projects. I just find that to be very problematic. I think you have made a lot of improvements, and I think it shows in the drawings, the lower height of the garage, and I think, and the trellises and the screens. I think that shows pretty clearly in the drawings that that you've tried to minimize the impact. The concern I have would be between the handicap ramp and the property line. And I guess goes to sheet 813, is if you're trying to put in like the podocarpus trees, like a screen trees, in a little 5-foot planting zone with excavated basements on both sides. And I did see that you have like silva-cell detail in the set, but I wasn't sure where that was being used. But typically, I guess I would ask staff is for the city or the urban forestry if they had a recommendation for the minimum soil volume. We've done that on other projects. Like sometimes I've seen like 120 cubic feet or whatever it is for that particular species. I'd like some recommendation on that, because otherwise what will happen is that it'll stunt the growth of the trees, and then you won't get the intended effect. And again, as I mentioned in my question before, is I'm interested in what's happening along the Caltrain right away along with the fence. And I would say that I think that I used to be a long-time Caltrain commuter, and the experience along Caltrain in Menlo Park is really fabulous. And then you get to Palo Alto along California Avenue. It's really pretty awful, unfortunately, where we've put the blank 300-foot long blank walls facing the tracks without any windows or any relief whatsoever. And it's just to me it's just not thinking correctly about the project. I think it's better to have like a two-fronted project ideally. I don't think that doesn't show in any of our zoning or design guidelines, but I think that's a better way to design a building. And then on the also on landscape, I think the thing that I really dislike about the existing building is the landscape in the front, because it was a car dealer. They didn't really want landscaping because they wanted to show off the BMWs. But to me, like the Groupon building and some of the new landscaping in front of 195 Page Mill is better, and I think that you're tying into that with the bulb outs, with the London plane trees, as well as the secondary row of trees inboard of the sidewalk. And I think to me that's highly desirable in trying to connect the neighborhood back together. And so I would be able to find in favor. I could support the finding for that for pedestrian amenities. And I think that the plaza also helps. So I think that that's all good. On the building facade, at least on the front facade, I like that you have divided the building into two. I think before when you had it into like 3 elements, it was getting a little too cluttered. I think breaking it into 2 keeps it pretty simple. On the streetscape elevations, it seems to work well with the Groupon building. So that's where I am. I'm curious to see on the board, for the board, since this is our second hearing.
Correct.
Right. We're not supposed to make a recommendation today, but I think the board is pretty opinionated about it. So I think maybe, do you have a collective thought about what we want to see in the final, the third submittal?
I'd like to see us give them clear direction about the parking structure. I think 2 or 3 of us at least have, I think I've heard say clearly that it's really needs to be shifted to a different location, but we owe them a clear direction on something so critical to the project. I feel the parking structure needs to be relocated someplace else.
I'm not sure that it's fixable in its current, yeah.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, I think
they've had 2 times to come back to us, and honestly, they've come back with the same thing. They really didn't take our serious criticism to heart. They tried to put lipstick on it. And that just leads me to think, okay, we get another go at this, and the answer is going to be no, at least for me, if I don't see these issues solved. And it's just, it's a shame. It's a beautiful parcel. There's no reason this can't be done.
Thank you, Chair. Just as the board continues its deliberation, a comment has come up a couple of times about multiple ingress-egress from the site. And city staff has a perspective that a single input-output driveway is ideal at this location due to the bicycle traffic that we see on Park. So as you're considering your deliberations, please consider that we would be interested in a single driveway curb cut.
Thank you, that makes sense.
Yeah, that's fine. It'd be nice to see a circulation pattern that worked. It'd be nice to see that kind of statement in the staff report so we understand all the parameters involved. But I'd put back to my fellow board members that we owe them clear direction about big issues with the site planning. And I think I've made clear how I feel about it, but.
I agree. Having been on both sides, there's nothing more frustrating than getting, 15 or 20 of these comments and not really having anything that is a little bit more directed. Now, having just been told that you're only allowed one access point, I think that almost indicates that you're going to have to do some changes with the building or something, either shifting it or relocating it, because that's going to be real tough to do. But I would even be, I understand the L-shaped parking space that, that you end up at the corner of the building with but if that's the case, then, that's something that maybe you can't live with. But if that's the case, then I think the parking structure needs to work more, because the parking structure also doesn't work at the moment. If the parking structure worked a lot better, where you didn't have all these strange configurations you'd have to do just to get into a parking space, I'd be more amenable to it. I'm not as adamant that it needs to be underground, and I'm not even adamant that it needs to be in a different location. It just doesn't work the way it is now. Whether that means it needs two ramps on each floor or whatever the case, I don't know. I'm not going to design it for you, but the reality of it is it doesn't work the way it does now.
The staff had mentioned, or somebody had mentioned residential.
Can I just, one more thing to staff. One of I can understand where you want the one main exit, but it sure seems like it would make things a whole lot easier if even there was an exit only, off the site or something to avoid some of these. Is that just not allowed at this point, or?
Yeah, thanks. I'm going to ask Jared Mullen to give you some more detailed response to that.
Okay.
So in regard to the driveway, or driveways potentially, the code doesn't say anything that thou shall not have two driveways on a property on a bicycle boulevard. But when we evaluate these sites during the discretionary review process, we look at the circulation pattern, and we look at the city's bicycle and pedestrian connectivity, as well as obviously the automobile connectivity. And Park Boulevard is a established bicycle boulevard in the city's bicycle and pedestrian transportation plan. So generally, it's a good access management principle to limit the number of curb cuts proportionally to the size of the building. And then when you throw in the bicycle and pedestrian nature of Park Boulevard, we do try to limit the number of conflict points, and every time you add a driveway, you introduce new conflict points. So it's not the end of the world if there's two driveways, but if we are reevaluating the site, we'd like to start with one driveway given the size of the project. It's not the largest project in the world, so that's something that we'll start with, but two driveways is not the end of the world.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. I have a question for the board members. So we do have, I think in one of our findings is about compatibility with with adjacent residential uses. I think there were some comments about, I think Peter had about maybe the vines would not be able to be maintained. Are there any, do any of the other board members have concerns about screening or any buffering between the two uses?
Well, I guess a couple of, we're talking about the covered parking on the second portion. If these are, I agree that the way that those are designed, they're basically just a structural element to hold the the planting up. It is true that I would probably suggest, if that's the case, that that becomes a little bit more integrated into the architecture. You can still put the landscaping on it, but then if in 2 or 3 years the landscaping dies, it doesn't become an eyesore, that it actually then blends with the architecture of the building. Whether that means you use some of the, the integrated screening or something that is on other parts of the parking structure.
Okay, and then I did want to, Q, I think you had a question about the vines and the green screen. This is my experience. Typically, you can actually get the vines to grow within a year or two. If, there's a big if. One is, typically vines like to be in full sun. And so when you put them in, in a shady location, I find basically you don't get any, often you don't get any growth whatsoever. And then the other thing is that you have to have the right amount of soil volume. The times when I've used it, we're trying to fit it in like a little 1 foot planting area. The vines start off initially and then they become stunted and they don't grow. But vines are actually very vigorous. The issue often is keeping them keeping them contained, because often like these species are can grow 20 or 30 feet high. I didn't review all the species in the landscape plan, but I mean that's the typical case. Okay, is that it for the board? I think we allow usually a rebuttal period, or when? Yes.
I would have trouble right now making the finding about circulation. It doesn't seem to me to work in too many different ways. It's an interesting point about the bicycle access, and I've been looking at the landscaping again, looking at visibility, because the problem is always that when you're going in and out of driveways in particular, bicycles shoot by so fast, and if you're gauging so I didn't really look at it in terms of visibility triangles, but it looks reasonably good. I think Alex's point about the chair's point about integrating the landscaping with the good landscaping that's emerging in other sites in the area is an important one. That would go a long way. And the other thing is that I think that, to me, the parking lot and the building don't seem, there's nothing that signals to me that this parking lot is for this building as opposed for the residential use next to it. And I think that's really important for functional circulation. I spend too much time driving into the wrong driveway when I'm in strange places. And there's a lot of strangers driving along Park because it leads you, because it's off a major arterial, because it leads you into a shopping district. So it's a little different than if you're actually in the research park where you mostly get people who go there every day. So that would matter to me along those lines. I'm concerned also that vines can be wonderful. They can also die really fast. And it would be important that those structures look good with or without. I do think you might have a constituency for code enforcement if they didn't do well in the housing next door.
Okay, so Tom, do you have any follow-ups for us?
Yeah, maybe just kind of a general question, point of clarification. I think as someone noted, we did begin at one point a couple of years ago with a building that had been more centered on the site. We had 2 accesses. We have been led, pretty much as staff has laid out just now, to have 1 access. And we can certainly, modify the site in any number of ways. We've got the ability to, to come up with a variety of circulation on site. However, I believe that with 1 site access, I don't believe we're going to be able to eliminate entirely dead ends. Unless we were to rotate the building and have it run from street to the train at the back and have a broad width of site to be able to circulate around and come out once, I think it's going to be difficult not at least having a circulation behind the building. We're going to want to, I think that the design guidelines for this area really, really push for the idea of having as much integration and pedestrian activity and buildings that front the street and provide activity, visual activity and so on. So, I'm not keen on the idea of having a small amount of building, but rather a broad amount of building. So I'm just, saying up front here that I feel like there's a little of a conflict here. It sounded like there might be a little flexibility on a second exit, whether it's an exit only or whatever, but I mean, that's really truly the only way I think that we're going to avoid all dead ends. We can get close, but I think we're still going to have some otherwise. So just a comment.
Well, I mean, there's one item that would change this drastically, is that is exactly like some of the people have said, if you drop the parking underground, then you end up with a whole lot more flexibility as far as the site. You could leave the building right where it is and come up with a fairly like I said, I don't have a problem with, let's say, having one area where you have a dead-end corridor, as long as you leave, a couple of area where you could actually turn around. The biggest problem I see with this one is that every one of them is a dead end.
Right.
So I mean, you've got like 5 of these things out of 5. So that's the part I have a problem with. If you said we made the other 4 work and there's one dead end just because of, then I'd agree with you completely, saying then it becomes a toss-up. Is it more favorable to have the single entry or exit if I have to put up with this dead end coordinate? I'd have no problem with that. But like I said, it's almost wanting it for the parking to go underground just to give you more flexibility to do what you need to do at grade.
Can I, also related to the parking, because I mean, to go underground, I think you've mentioned previously that it's very expensive. And then I think the board has not seen information about the COE plume and the TCE in the soil, and if it's what is it, tier 1 and tier 2? There are different types of, 2 different, what do you call it, disposal sites, depending on the toxicity of the soil, and the costs, I think between the 2 are huge. I don't have personal experience in that, but my understanding is it's huge. There's a huge difference in that, and so we haven't seen it. So we need more information and on all of your thinking about that.
Sure.
On the curb cuts, excuse me. I agree with Board Member Guyer's comments that he just made, and to me, in addition to that, I just see a huge point of congestion right at the entry to the site, where if you have any kind of a backup, you're going to get cars waiting in the bicycle lane, or cars trying to decide whether they're going to go up the ramp or to the right. And so I agree that if we can eliminate at least some of the dead ends and maybe move that point of congestion either further into the site or relieve the congestion overall, I don't think I have so much of a problem with just the one curb cut. But as it is, I just see potential for too many points of congestion.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Okay, so I think we don't have any other items on this, although I do want to, I don't think we have the,
We have to move to,
oh yeah, we need to move to continue this item. Anyone want to make a motion? Nobody wants to.
Yeah, so I think we need a motion from the board on that last item. And, I have some notes that I can offer to the record, and the board could say, yes, that's heading in the right direction, or strike or add some things if you wanted to articulate a motion to the applicant. Or do you feel like it's been done through the dialogue? I mean, we have a lot of ideas, and to the extent that we can add a finer point would be ideal.
Yes, when?
I have 2 comments on that suggestion. One is that I'm missing the data to make a decision. I don't know. My perception presently is that the parking provided involves a lot of illusory spaces, that they're really quite difficult to get to, and that the problem of circulation on the site is a significant one. I hadn't been thinking about the backup problem, but when I look at how it all works, I think there's a good potential for tangling up that busy pedestrian bicycle point. And that's not going to help because it's also a busy car circulation place. So I don't think the parking presently works. I don't know what the alternatives are that would work, but I think what we have doesn't meet our standards. And I'm also a bit uncomfortable about adopting a motion which says you should do X, Y, Z based on the partial information that we have now. I think it is very valuable for you when you get us to get on the record and line ourselves up, but I don't like putting that into a motion. So I would move that we continue this to a date uncertain unless the applicant wanted to ask us for further clarification on any point other than the garage and parking.
I agree. I mean, having known the architect for 30 years, that he's more than competent to come up with a design, I think, and I think he understands what we're looking for. I agree. I was told from the very first day I sat on one of these boards, don't design it for the applicant. It just, it's not the way it should be done, and I purposely don't want to do that. I don't want to say, do this or do that or whatever. I think he understands that we're not happy with the circulation. We could live with, let's say, a dead-end situation based on the fact that you're limited to the one drive entry. And so I don't think we need to, explain that. I mean, I don't want to put words in your mouth, Tom, but I mean, I'm guessing that you understand what we're looking for, basically. And I guess it took this time to make you understand that we were a lot more, it was a lot more critical to us, I think, than it came across probably the last time. So I'll second your motion.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Okay, so we will see you sometime before March 31st. That's the big deadline. Okay, so I don't think we have any minutes. There's nothing on the agenda.
Yeah, Chair Liu, I know they're not on the agenda. They were sent to us for review, and if I could just make a comment on them, that's fine, right?
Sure, but you make a comment, but I don't think we can vote on it.
Right.
Yeah.
So I just noticed that in a few of the items, I think they were items 4 and 5, I believe they were. We seem to have gained a board member, and the votes were 6-0, but they should have been 5-0. Yeah.
That's the ghost.
Great, thank you. Oh, I did want to give the board members, all the board members, an update on our schedule. It's not, I think it's changed from what's in your packets. So 16th, I think there's not going to be a meeting.
At least according to Jody last night.
Yeah, that's the latest. December 7th, we are going to have a meeting, and that's probably likely to be the Verizon cell sites. And then we may start meet early because that's going to be Q's last meeting on the board. And we will have a meeting on 12/21, and we will probably have new board members at that time, if the council votes on it. The council vote is for commissioners is next Monday? I think I was told it was the 13th. And we do have items, and there are items for that meeting.
Don't we also then have to elect a new chair? And
yes, and I've
do
asked,
that on the 7th, I guess?
No, because the new board members won't be in until the 21st at the earliest.
21st of December?
Yeah,
so we'll see what happens.
Yeah, we do it a year after, and I forget. I mean, sometimes it floats a meeting or two, but we could take a look at that. And there's also sort of a board management discussion about how you want to do your elections and when that takes place relative to new members coming in. But we would plan on having it on the 1-year anniversary of the last election at this point. And I'll have to find out which date that is. It's coming up.
Yes. Okay, we adjourn. Thank you.
Okay.